Hello, everybody. Hi. If my volume is clear and everything is fine, then just tell me a hi in the comments. So, today we are meeting to discuss Untouchable, the novel by Mulk Raj Anand. Okay, hi. And if you'll just need to give StreamYard permission if you want to show your names in the comments. Hello. Good to meet all of you. So I think uh, things are fine. Things seem to be looking fine. So I guess we can begin. And just to give you an idea, if StreamYard might ask your permission to show your name in the comments. So if this is so, you can uh, just agree and accept it. I think it's facebook.com StreamYard or something. It'll just show you the link. You'll just need to click on it if for and it allows you to comment because I'm using StreamYard to uh, continue with the discussion. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just like last time, I'm going to share screen with you. This time I have two screens, so like last time, I don't need to really keep shifting between screens. So hopefully, it'll be more seamless this time. So I'm starting to share my screen. Okay, so another thing is you might be seeing two Archanas over there. So it's both are me, and it's just that I have to, have two screens so that it's easier to moderate the discussion. That's all. So let's begin. So today we are going to discuss about Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable. It seems quite a serendipity actually, or I don't know what do you call it, because it's so surprising that we are discussing the book on Gandhiji's birth anniversary, and also we are discussing the book during one of the most pressing issues which are being discussed online about the um caste based crime happening in our country. So I think in these ways, the book seems much more pertinent today than ever before. So let's start with the discussion. And if you, whatever points or whatever comments you want to add, please keep putting your comments below, and I'll be sharing and answering them as we go. And it doesn't need to be a question, it can be any point of view that you want to share with us. So let's continue. So today I thought we'll talk a little bit about the history of this, the history behind the book, and the time period in which this particular book was written, a little bit about the author, and on the genesis of Untouchable. In fact, on the genesis of Untouchable is an article written by Mulk Raj Anand, and we'll be talking about a little bit about that. And then I wanted to bring up a few points of discussion based on the novel and some of my favorite quotes. And I hope you have some quotes or something to share too. It would be great. So let's begin. So, a little bit about the history of the novel. This book was, written during the 1930s, and at this period of time, there were three most important Indian novelists who were writing in English, and they were Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, and Raja Rao. So Mulk Raj Anand's most famous work was Untouchable. R.K. Narayan's was Swami and Friends, and Raja Rao's famous novel was Kantapura. There were many others who wrote in English, Indian writers who wrote in English before that. In fact, I think the one of the initial ones was in 1803, but most of them were writing in journalistic pieces, travel pieces, and also they were writing a lot about Hinduism and religion. So though they were writing in English, it wasn't really a novel. They weren't really writing in the novel format. So I'll also be talking a little bit about the very first Indian English novel. It's just coming up next. But before that, some of the commonalities between the books, all the books which were published during this time period was that most of them focused on social reform, and they were more journalistic pieces. So this focus was more on journalism and less, I think, on the storytelling aspects. And most of them were nationalistic in nature. So the Indian English writers then did not want to be seen as complicit in British rule. So they wanted to distance themselves from that. And also, the main focus and purpose for writing in English seemed to be to criticize the English. And also, they wanted to criticize the local Indian realities, the local issues, and the way of life which was happening at that point of time. Following this, the Trinity novels, to just go a little bit further deeper into this, uh, all these three authors, so all the novels which were written by them usually dealt with issues of caste, the upliftment of downtrodden, modernity and religion, role of religion, uh, gender roles, the place of women in society, the situation of the villagers and peasantry, and also about all of them also had a little bit on how differently they treated Gandhism. In fact, R.K. Narayan's few novels look at the entire Gandhian principles and Gandhism very differently. However, despite all this, all the good intentions with which these novels were written, it's said that the novels were not really very effective in bringing about change. And this could also be the one of the reasons for this could also be that they were written in English. So maybe it did not really reach the common man as expected. Hi, someone else has also joined us. Um, I'm Yeah. So let me just continue with the discussion. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the first Indian English novel. I know this is doesn't really tie up with our discussion on Untouchable, but then I just wanted to. I came across this and I wanted to share it with all of you. So the Bengali novelist Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Yeah, so he is considered as the very first Indian English novelist, and his book Raj Mohan's Wife is the first Indian English novel. Initially, it was serialized with the title Wife, and it was published in the Calcutta Weekly, The Indian Field, in 1864. Many people consider the book as actually historical romance or something, but it's not true, because it actually shows how a middle class housewife suffers through at the hands of her husband. So it's more about social reform and women empowerment rather than about romance. um, in fact, both most of the novels at that time were in that category. So going further, I thought we'll now discuss a little bit about the author. So Mulk Raj Anand's, in fact, he says that he was heavily influenced by his mother's storytelling skills. So his mother had this vast knowledge of folk tales, and she had heard it from her own mother during her childhood years. So she narrated legends, fables, myths, and other narratives about God, birds, animals to him, and he was fascinated by that. So, in fact, in one of the interviews, he says, "So sure was my mother's gift of storytelling that sometimes I found myself wrapped in her tales with an intensity of wonder." So, he probably had gotten heavily influenced with her storytelling skills, which is what led him to become a writer later on. He received his education from Khalsa College in Amritsar, and he also received scholarship for a research in philosophy in London, and he was given the PhD by London University. And it was around this time that he started writing. And he was a prolific writer, and he continued to write and publish till the age of 96. He passed away in the year 99, and till then, he had a very active literary life. Besides novels and short stories, he has also written a number of books on art, paintings, and literature. I just mentioned a few of his awards. So, one is the International Peace Prize. He also won the Padma Bhushan. He also won the Sahitya Academy Award, which I've forgotten to mention here. And in 1978, he was awarded the E.M. Forster Award, which was an amount of 3,000, and it was considered huge at that time. And okay, now coming to the criticism about his writing. So, this has been very interesting to read about this. So, there's been a lot of criticism about Anand as a novelist. So, they say that all his writing is just propaganda writing, the critics say. So, a propaganda novel is said that it's one which is so dominated by its author's ulterior purpose that the propaganda cannot be ignored. And normally, one who dislikes that line of propaganda would find the book unreadable. So this is the critic's point of view. Indoctrination does not go with the creative process and aesthetic experience. So the saying that art has to be for art's sake was something that Mulk Raj Anand did not believe in. By the way, please drop in your comments and let me know, what do you think about propaganda writing? Do you think a novel can have a propaganda, and does having a propaganda actually take away something from the novel? In fact, I'm just remembering this quote which says, if you want to give a message, send a telegram, don't write a novel. So what do you think? Do you agree with that? uh, Now let's see how Anand responded to the criticism about his writing. So, what he says is, I do not in the least mind criticism, even adverse probably, because the suffering from which my novels have been written has already been rewarded by the fact that they have gone into so many languages of the world in spite of their truthfulness. I think his novels have been translated in about 36 languages around the world. So, in spite of their truthfulness and exposure of many shams, hypocrisies, and orthodoxies of India, you will find that, amorphous as my books are, I did stick to the novel form more or less as an imaginative interpretation of Indian life rather than use it as a vehicle to sermonize. And the posing of the problems of human beings in the 30s by people like Mulrux, Selin, and Hemingway gave the necessary sense of discrimination to my own treatment of the predicament of our people as against the European view. So, coming back a little bit to this, I think I need to talk a little bit about the history behind why Mulk Raj Anand became what he was. So, what happened was Mulk Raj Anand stayed in London for nearly 2 decades. That is from the period of 1924 to 1945. And when he arrived in England, he was completely, in love with the country, and he really admired Britain for her achievements in science and technology. And this was during 1924. Very soon, in 1926, the general strike took place in Britain. And it made people conscious that there was a huge class war happening in Britain between the haves and the have nots. that was when Anand realized that scientific and technological discoveries, though they may be great, it will not result in social benefits if it is controlled by only a selected band of people. And uh, if that group of people are going to manipulate it to their own advantage and they have the say in matters of domestic and foreign policy, then it is of no use to society. Once Anand realized this, in fact, he says there is this quote by him. Let me just read it out. The people of Britain, no less than the people of India, are yet to win their liberty. So this is what he felt, and in fact, he and his colleagues, they supported the workers. They sided with them, and the strike was a failure, which was something very disappointing to him. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Anand was an overt nationalist, and he championed the socialist cause in his fiction. This was very common. This was something common which he had with many European and American writers of the day. So what happened was, this was one thing which really affected Anand. The strike of the general strike of 1926, which took place in Britain. After this, the another thing that affected him was the failure of League of Nations. So after the First World War, it was believed that the League of Nations is going to be preserving the peace and security in the country. But fascism was in the rise in Italy. Nazi power was coming up in Germany. Japan invaded Manchuria, and in all this confusion, the League of Nations completely shattered. So the intellectuals of the West were alarmed by what was happening. So they joined together and they met in Paris in 1935. So these were people, this particular meeting was actually led by Maxim Gorky of Russia, Romain Rolland of France, Thomas Mann of Germany, and E.M. Forster of England. So they all decided to raise their voice for liberty for the writers, because as creators and critics, they felt that they had a duty to maintain culture. So they in turn, after the conference, they appealed to writers around the world to be courageous and sensitive and to fulfill their public calling. So they told them to come forward and arouse the people to act and struggle for a just and human society. Now, what this led to was, as a few months immediately after this Paris conference of Western intellectuals, many Indian students who were studying in England, they assembled together in London and they formed a Progressive Writers Association. Now, this Progressive Writers Association had the blessings of great figures like Tagore and Premchand. The manifesto of this association itself was in fact finalized by Mulk Raj Anand. So he was a major part of the Progressive Writers Association. And these writers felt that the principal function of literature must be to, reflect and express the aspirations and fundamental problems of the toiling masses, and ultimately help in creating a socialist society. So even though there were many people among them who were not Marxists, but still they all realized that there has to be some social transformation taking place, and India needs to gain her political independence. So this was something very strongly they all felt, and they all strongly rejected the idea that art can be just there for art's sake. From the very initial stages, Anand felt that a writer should not just shut himself in an ivory tower and, just simply just rage against what's happening in the world, but he should be a person who is one with the people and understands their sorrows and joys. And he strongly felt the purpose for a person to write a novel is to change mankind and through mankind to change society. So, like George Orwell, he felt that the work of a genuine creative writer is inspired by a mission. Now, I think as the years have gone by, there's a lot of opposing views about this. Some of them say that no, this should not be the right way to do it. You know, if you a novel is supposed to tell a story, it's not a propaganda. So, like I said, please do share your views on this point too. Uh, let's just have a look at the comments. Some books are to be read, some books to be chewed, and some books to enlighten us, as Bacon says. There are books for every view. True, very true. So, yes, that is right, I guess. So, uh, but when it comes to a novel, is it okay if your novel has a message? Then that's a very, I think, a very tricky question, and it's an art also, I guess, in a way. In fact, I think any good novel does carry a message. I don't think there's a novel which doesn't have a message. There is some subtle message in the book because you're talking about society. So when you talk about society, obviously there is something that you are reflecting, and some amount of your own thoughts do seep into your book. So I guess what really matters is how well you're able to pull it off. Are you able to take it as a story and share the message, or because you want to share the message, are you losing out to the story? I think that's what matters in the end. So, in your opinion, what do you think happened? In Untouchable, did Anand succeed in sticking to the novel format as he conveyed his message, or do you think he, lost the essence of it somewhere? So, do put in your comment and let me know what's your point of view on that. Now, going to the next point. So, this was a very interesting article that I read. So, on the genesis of Untouchable, this is an article which was written by Mulk Raj Anand, and it was so interesting that I really wanted to share a little bit about it with you. So, it seems Untouchable was written over a long weekend in 1930. Yes, that's it. Just over a weekend, he ends up writing a novel, while here, I know most of us are struggling with it for years. So Mulk Raj Anand tells us that it just poured out like hot lava from the volcano of his imagination, and that during its composition, he hardly slept for more than 6 hours in 3 days. And after writing his novel in April 1929, he actually went to meet Gandhiji in Sabarmati Ashram. I think I made a mistake. It was actually in 1928 or something. I think I made a mistake in the year over here. Okay. Sorry about that. So in April 1929, he went to see Gandhiji in the Sabarmati Ashram, and he showed Gandhiji the novel that he had written. So Anand read some portions of the novel to Gandhiji, who suggested that he needs to cut down at least 100 pages out of the novel, especially those pages in which Baka seemed to be thinking and dreaming like a Bloomsbury intellectual. That's what Gandhiji said. That's his exact words. And in fact, he said you can continue to stay in the ashram and work on the book, provided you promised not to drink, not to think of your English girlfriend, and you must clean the latrines once a week. So these were the three conditions which Gandhiji posed to Anand, and Anand agreed. He stayed on in the ashram, and he followed Gandhiji's advice, revised the novel during his 3 month stay there. And in fact, the novel was initially at 250 pages. He cut out about nearly 100 pages, and only 150 pages were left. After he finished it, he read the revised version to Gandhiji, who approved of it. So that's how Untouchable came into existence. But a little more now, how it came into existence now, the next part two of it, let's see. After he published the book, after he wrote the book, he just couldn't get it published. it faced rejection again and again and again. In fact, it was in a period of 2 years. The book never saw the light of the day for 2 years after he finished writing it. And it was rejected by 19 publishers in this time period. I wanted to read out one of the rejection letters here. So, if any of you have received rejection letters, I think you would feel much more heartened because I don't think there's anything a worse rejection letter that you can receive when compared to this. So, Edward Thompson, who was the writer of several books about India, he wrote a letter to Anand, and he gave reasons why the publisher rejected the manuscript. So the publisher, of course, he did not write the rejection letter telling this, but he had conveyed his thoughts to Edward Thompson, and Edward Thompson conveyed the thoughts to Anand in a letter. It is true, so I'm just reading it out, quotes. It is true that Indian books do not sell. There is such a welter of propaganda and sentimentalism over everything. Indian, British, die-hard, national, Congress journalist, fake poet and mystic, theosophist, Gandhi adorer, American Women's Club, all combine to make everything Indian to all combine to make everything Indian depressing to anyone not half-witted. I seem to find signs that India is beginning to bore even Indians. As a matter of fact, the novel was not accepted because it was unlike the traditional books. Okay, that's the second part of it. So this is one of the things which was one of the harsh rejections that Anand had received. But the other constant rejection, the constant reason for rejection of most of his novels was that most of his novels, most of the rejections for Untouchable was that they said that the book was dirty. They couldn't stand the squalor and dirt that it depicts. So, in fact, some of the critics have written the book smelled too strong. And they told him to delete descriptions of dirt and cruelty in the novel. And yes, Anand actually listened to them and he revised the novel several times. And what we are actually received is a much more watered down version of what his initial writing was. But among all this, all these rejections, in fact, Anand was so deeply depressed by the rejections that at a particular point of time, he thought of committing suicide. And he just couldn't take the rejections anymore. Thankfully, he didn't do that. He did not quit. And he continued writing. I think his last published piece was about when he was 96 years of age. He lived on till 99 years of age. So that's a happy ending. But among all these rejections, one of the most encouraging things which happened was he got a letter from E.M. Forster. And after reading the manuscript, Forster wrote Anand a letter and he said, I found it extremely interesting. You make your sweeper sympathetic, yet avoid making him a hero or a martyr. And by the appearance of Gandhi and conversation about missionary at the end, you give the book a coherence and shape which it would otherwise have lacked. Shortly after this, Wishart Books, a publisher, published it. But he said that I would publish it upon one condition. The popular and eminent English novelist E.M. Forster must write a preface to it. Only then I would publish your book. And Forster quickly said yes. And he accepted and wrote a preface for Anand. And I think you must have read that preface when you read the book. Though I think he gave away a lot in the preface, but it's fine. It was a beautiful preface. And one of the conditions in fact, the publisher explains that one of the reasons why he gave this condition is that Forster should say that this book is not really dirty. So that was one of the intentions of asking Forster to write the preface which Forster wrote. And in fact, Forster says Forster was offered a sum of money as as fees for writing the preface by the publisher, which Forster said that Mulkraj Anand must keep it and that he wouldn't accept it and he would want Anand to keep it. He says, "It will be a great pleasure to me if I should be of any help in introducing such an interesting and original piece of work to readers in this country." Saying that, he wrote the preface. So after this, in 1944, the Penguin edition of the novel was published, and by now the novel has been translated to, I think it's more than 36 languages, in fact, right now. So this is the next point. There are a few more comments. Let's just see that. I think he did manage to tell his story. Yes, I thought so. Though I towards the end it didn't feel a little satisfying as a novel, but then yes, he did manage to tell the story. I would say 95% of the time. Here and there, he wanted to, I think, include a little bit of his own ideas and the reason why he was writing the novel, which didn't actually glare so badly. So I think it's all fine. And the next comment is, "I wish to thank you for having chosen this book that revolves around untouchability for discussion on this day." That is Mahatma Ji's birthday. The choice made is timely and the book timeless. I completely agree with you, Syamal Rao. In fact, I never realized that too. Even when I fixed the date initially, I didn't think of that. I just thought it's a Friday evening and that most of you would be free. It never struck me that it's actually Gandhiji's birthday too. It's been great, actually. It's a good time for us to discuss the book. The book is more of an awareness of a social issue than a story. Yes, it's true in certain ways, just like what we said now. Um, I think, yeah, it is true. It's more to make us aware of the social issue. And though he has tried to form it into a story, I think actually at the end of the day, this is so much of a personal preference. Like Tulika says that he did manage to tell his story, while Shanti says the book is more of an awareness of social issue rather than a story. So I think it's definitely more of a personal preference. And it's fine. It depends on, I think, how we view it and what kind of impression it leaves in our mind. Though we have come a long way, there is so much reforms yet to be carried out. True, very, very true. And I also had written about this in one of the discussion points. Let's talk about it soon. So coming to the next thing, okay, so the discussion topics have started. So the first point that I wanted to talk about was female untouchables. I'm going to just throw open the question. So and then I will also try and answer about whatever points touched me about this particular question and why I think it's relevant to our discussion. If there are any other topics you think we should discuss, please keep dropping it in the comments below. And also, if there are any other points about the topic we are discussing, please drop that in the comments too. The first thing I wanted to talk about today was about female untouchables. And what purpose do you think Sohini's assault serves in Untouchable? And Anand did a lot of cutting in his novel, but he did not want to cut out Sohini's part. So why do you think Anand decided that this was important enough to include in the novel? Her assault was important enough to be included in the novel. I have a few points here, but if you have any other things to add, please do drop it in the comments below. I think female untouchables are one of the most vulnerable people, in even among the untouchables, their condition seems to be the most deplorable, even as we read in the book. There are restrictions placed upon them not only by the higher caste, but also by their own surroundings, by the people who need to protect them, by the men who need to protect them, by the women who must be with them, which doesn't seem to be happening. And there are too much of prejudices against them. In fact, for Sohini, we saw that she decided it's even futile to even lodge a complaint against her assaulter because nothing is going to happen. And if Baka tries to avenge against the priest, he will not be believed and he will also have to face imprisonment and death. This, I think one of the main reasons why um, he wanted to include it, Anand wanted to include Sohini's assault in the book, was because it's really grounded in the reality of the times. And untouchables are victims of numerous violent crimes, including rape, and this is especially true with female untouchables too. The shocking thing was this is not just reality of Anand's time, it's also a reality of our present day situation. As any one of you who's following the news, all of you who's following news or who's on social media must already be knowing about the case which is happening right now. So again, there is no support from police or no support from courts or no support uh, from any of the authorities who should actually be taking action on this. So I think to a certain extent, while the life of while untouchability has been removed and while their lives have been better, the situation for female untouchables is still pretty bad in our country. While this may not be true in all the major cities, but where it's not really a distinguishing between an untouchable or no, it's not. The violence against women is not based on caste, maybe in the cities, but it still very much is based on caste in everywhere else in the country. Going to the next point. Yeah, so I there are a few more comments. Let's just see that. So so there is, though we have come a long way, there is so much of reforms left and yet to be carried out. Yes, that's very true. And the book is unique in its Indianness and goes straight to the heart of every Indian. Very true. Its value is immensely human and moral. I cannot but repeat E.M. Forster's prefatory words: Untouchable could only have been written by an Indian, and an Indian who observed from the outside. Very true. So that's in fact one of Anand's characteristic, as a writer. He always says that when you write about, did I have that? I just want to see if I have that particular quotation. Just a minute. Um, yeah. So I have this thing where he says that a writer must be with the people, must ally himself with their sorrows and little joys, and only then he can write his novel. He should not stand on a high perch, but he has to go into the raging storm himself. So that's one of his quotes, and I think that's very much revealed in the novel. In fact, staying at the Gandhiji's ashram while writing it has influenced him a lot. He says that actually having to clean the latrines once a week and doing all those duties made him understand more about what was actually, Baka going through. That made a difference to him in his writing. Uh, what happened with Sohini goes to further show the complete power the upper caste had on them. Very true. And also that their family, their brothers or fathers had no power to protect them. Uh, Very, very, very true. It's the sad part is, uh, you know, I don't know, history repeating itself or history, I shouldn't say repeating itself, history continuing as it is. And there has not been much change at all. Yeah, unfortunately, it's happening even now today. True, Tulika, it does. What an utter state of helplessness it must be. Yeah, yeah, to be imprisoned in your own house, and when your daughter's body is just taken away by the police to be cremated by themselves. I don't know if there is anything worse that could be actually happening in the country right now. So I'm not sure, if I need to talk about if this is something to do with caste or if this is something to do with whom are they protecting. If it wasn't a caste issue, then why should they even do this? Whom are they trying to protect? Why are they trying to protect them? I think these are questions we need to ask ourselves. The story of the marginalized protagonist and his sister, uh, the Sohini's humiliation and exploitation in the hands of the upper caste is realistic. In the current times, it's very difficult not to notice the presence of this prosecutory mindset in certain segments of society. True, it's quite realistic. In fact, after doing whatever he does, the priest runs around saying that I have been polluted, which is which could be the, I think, the worst thing possible. And in the current times, it's very difficult not to notice the presence of this prosecutor. True, very, very, very true. In the current times, yeah, it's sad actually, and I don't know when this is going to change. Even in today's society, justice for Manisha is being ignored by our politicians and police. Yes, it is. And I think we have chosen the book at a very important time. And oh, it's surprising how a book which was written about nearly 90 years before is still apt for today's time. And what does it show of ourselves as a society? How far have we evolved in 90 years? It's quite surprising to see that. Please keep the comments coming. I am going to proceed to the next point of discussion, which is about white supremacy. This was again something, in fact, it slightly reminded me of The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which was our previous read. So, whiteness in the form of the British and other Europeans has a very elevated status in Untouchables India. Why is whiteness so highly regarded? I'm just going to share a few of my points. So, white supremacy in India during this period was basically, there were two kinds. So, one was the systemic and one was personal. You know, I think we were under British rule then. It was a colony. So, the people of Baka's generation, the generation before that, when they were under British rule, they did not try to ape the West because for them they were still rooted in their Indianness. So they did not really try to ape the West. Maybe they were in awe of them, but they never tried to ape them. But when it came to Baka's generation, they were completely mesmerized by this Europeans, and they started aping the West, dressing like them, maintaining hairstyles like them. He even drinks his tea like them, which was something so funny. So I think these are personally, how the people in general have personally started uh, aping the West and considering the habits of the white man, the dressing of the white man as something great. Uh, Systemic reactions is this solar topes, that there's that fable about this solar topes owner who is someone who has actually killed a sepoy, but because he is white, he is not being prosecuted. And he has a free go at it, and he just uh, keeps evading the eye, but just very much around. So this was one more, thing which shows that in the courts had in those days, if it was a white man who committed the crime, then he could get away with it. So there was systemic, kind of systemic white supremacy, and also there was personal, reasons for white supremacy. One of the things which really stood out for me was this sentence, which was Baka's reaction to the anger of Mary Hutchinson. He says, the Mem Sahib was more important to his slavish mind than the man who was touched. That is the man who he touches in the market by mistake and who gives him so many curses. So he says the Mem Sahib was more important to his slavish mind than the man who was touched. he being one of his many brown countrymen. Because the man who touched him, who he had touched by mistake, was actually one of his own brown countrymen. So he didn't really mind it so much. Though he didn't like it, he didn't mind it so much. But to displease the Mem Sahib was to him a crime for which no punishment was bad enough. So this is sad that, he placed so much of importance to Mary, whom, as Anand describes, was literally a nobody, who was a bully and a nobody. And but for him, for Baka, she was a great person and someone who's so important because she's a white lady, which is another sad thing. Um, Going on to the next point, the last point for discussion was Gandhiji's speech. So the Gandhiji's speech actually remains largely incomprehensible to Baka, but it contains a lot of, a plethora of political and social commentary on India. Before we go on to that, just a minute for one more comment. Yes, it continues even today. Many of us are prey to the cosmetic industry buying their white tone creams. Very, very true. I think it's still now, just like we saw in the bluest eye, still now that um, it's defined that when you're white, you're clean, you're pure, you're beautiful, or, that's the funda which is still being fed to us. So to continue Gandhiji's speech, I just wanted to share 3 points and which were specially made by Gandhiji's speech, and whatever whatever are your own. I'm going to share a little bit about my personal feeling about one of the points, but if you have anything to share too, please do share it. And if I'm wrong, please do tell me I'm wrong too. There were 3 main points in Gandhiji's speech. One was hypocrisy of the Indian society as a whole. He points out that while India is fighting for independence from Britain, India herself has stripped the freedoms of millions of human beings without feeling the slightest remorse for its iniquity. Very, very, very true. So he strongly felt that unless and until all the people came together as one and as equal, we can't really throw away the British rule. So this was a wonderful point. Then there was this condemnation of untouchability. So he believes that it's one of the Hinduism's greatest blot, and he behooves his audience to no longer acknowledge it. So even though they may be Hindus, and he says that no, don't acknowledge it. Treat them as your equal. And towards the end, he says untouchables are not blameless victims, and they too must change their habits in order to be accepted. And he tells them that they must be clean. They must not eat food which has been, given from the plates of people who've been eating it and thrown to them, and all those points. Somehow, my personal viewpoint about the last point of Gandhiji's speech was I couldn't really digest it because it felt more like victim blaming. Here, the victim is already in poverty, in suffering, and you blame him again. So, like, I don't know. I think, in fact, even Anand, I think, in my view, Anand also did not like this particular point of view of Gandhiji, which is why I think he stresses so much in his book how they did not even have water. So when they don't even have water, how are they supposed to clean themselves? How are they supposed to keep their surroundings clean? And most of them are living in a household. See, like for instance, Baka's family is living in a household where there's a little girl who's supposed to care for the house along with her other duties. It's not just caring for the house. She also has to sweep the road, she has to clean the temple and do all the other things. And along with that, she's supposed to cook and clean the house. So something has to give way. It cannot do it all. So I think somewhere very beautifully, Anand has tried to make the point to Gandhiji that it's not the untouchables, who is to be blamed for what was happening to them, that for why they are unable to keep themselves clean. And when someone is in hunger and poverty, I they cannot really be, like they say, beggars can't be choosers. So they are not in that position of power to reject that, I'm not going to take this food because this comes from the plate of someone. I'm not going to take this food because you've thrown the roti from the veranda, and it's landed near the gutter, so I'm not going to take this food. I don't think Baka was in that situation where he could do that. His condition was deplorable. So I think somewhere I'm not able to accept this point of view of Gandhiji. So in case I'm wrong, then please do correct me. And if you have any other particular different point of view with this, then please do let me know. And coming next, I just wanted to share a little bit of some quotes which I had kind of liked in the novel, which was something with the words with a punch. So I just wanted to share a few of them here. Charit Singh was feeling kind, though he did not relax the grin which symbolized 6,000 years of racial and class superiority. So this happens when he promises Baka a hockey stick, and so so though he does give it to him, there is this kind of a feeling of superiority in what he's doing. So Charit Singh's generous promise had called forth that trait of servility in Baka, which he had inherited from his forefathers. The weakness of the downtrodden, the helplessness of the poor and the indigent, suddenly receiving help, the passive contentment of the bottom dog, suddenly illuminated by the prospect of fulfillment of a secret and long cherished desire. How cure? The Hindus don't feed their cows, although they call the cow mother. So this was again another point which struck me. And again, this is something which is very true today too, despite having all cow vigilantes all around our country. I think one of the most ill-treated animals continues to remain as cows. For although he didn't know it, to him, work was a sort of intoxication, which gave him a glowing health and plenty of easy sleep. So this was something very, again, sweet. I think most of us also, even though we crib about what we need to do sometimes, I know a lot. But of course, when I'm working, I think I'm the most happy in it. The job doesn't really matter when you lose yourself in it. So his feelings would rise like spurts of smoke from a half smothered fire in fitful, unbalanced jerks when the recollection of some abuse or rebuke he had suffered kindled a spark in the ashes of remorse inside him. Um, this was again very beautifully written that I had to share it with you. These are some of the references which have been helping me. Um, a lot of online references and interviews that I refer to before I prepare this presentation. Just thought I'll share that too with you. So with that, let me stop my screen share and yeah. So great. Now I'm just going to look at the comments which we've received. Yeah. It continues even today. We have to fill forms with our caste. Yeah, I know that is kind of one of the uh, most sickest things to do. In fact, I think I didn't know there was something called caste for a very long time, which is surprising. But I think that's how most of us who are born in and who've lived in cities have always been. We don't really know anything about caste. And it's only when we get these, I think just before the 10th grade exams, we get these forms which ask us to mention our caste and also which asks us to mention, bring caste certificates and other things. That's when for the first time we realize, okay, there's something like this. And this differentiates me from the other classmates. I think this is somewhere, if there is some way in which we can at least keep it, okay, ask about caste, but at least I think not in the classroom, not in this way. I hope there's some, I'm not sure if there's any change in the education system right now, and whether they've stopped asking students to submit these things and maybe get it silently from the parents instead of showing the differences in the classroom. So I don't know how it is really. The reassuring feature of the book is the hope and positivity that Baka experiences when he hears the modernist poet speaking of the practical solution of flush system that will make the wicked rubbish about untouchability to disappear. But it is difficult to connect his sense of hope and positivity to present dates. Yeah, very, very true. He feels that once this flush system comes into place, this entire problem of untouchability is going to disappear and everything is going to be perfect. 90 years, it is sad that it's actually not true and it's now not going to happen for some time. But I think at least like what he says, and I was talking to my mother the other day, and she remembered how in her childhood days that yes, there was no system of flush and all that in her grandmother's house, and how there used to be people who used to come to collect and clean the latrines, which was sad, it was difficult to even hear about it, that actually such things were happening and it existed at that time. It seems so barbaric, but yes, it's, though he found it reassuring, but it's difficult to connect this sense of hope and positivity to present days. Very true. When poverty knocks the door, cleanliness and self-respect goes through the window. Very, very, very true. You're right, and it's surprising that Gandhiji said it. Even more surprising that he read the book and the anomaly didn't strike him. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Anand makes it such a huge point, but I don't know how Gandhiji didn't notice that. And yeah, I think, I don't know. There are various things about Gandhiji's thought processes about untouchability, and though he's been a major factor in whatever his contributions are in removing untouchability, there are a lot of other things which were proposed to him at that time, at that point of time, which he did not accept. So I'm not very sure on, whether he had a far vision, because his main vision was to bring Hindus together as one, and he did not want to do it in a way in which he wanted to eradicate untouchability, but he didn't want to make it in a way that he creates special provisions for the untouchables and gives them a lot of different preferences, because he felt that if he does that, then he is differentiating them in some way with from the other Hindus, which should not be the condition, which should not be the way it should be. It seems very I don't know, but that was what he thought, which is why he disagreed with Ambedkar, and he had his huge fast, which finally Ambedkar had to give up a lot of his own, his lot of his reforms which he wanted to bring in for the untouchables, which Gandhiji opposed because he felt that's going to make more rifts in society while we should be together. So I don't know, at sometimes maybe we cannot really judge um, now, after 100 years, we cannot really sit now and judge about what happened then, and whether they did right or wrong. Maybe they did it in the best interests of the country at that time. I think so, but or they did it hoping that they are right. But let's see. Even in the present day, women are considered as untouchables on those days and not allowed to enter the kitchen. Very, very true. I think this is a whole other thing. So, somehow I think, but this did not exist among untouchables. This seems to have existed only among the higher caste women. So, that's another difference. Then, upon completion of this book, I read Solzhenitsyn since, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. One day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, and felt that the elements in suppression, exploitation, and humiliation, whether through the power of cost or the power of state, are similar. Wonderful. Okay, I didn't. I've not read this. I should. I'll definitely check it out, Syamal Rao. Thank you so much for bringing it to my notice. In fact, that was something very wonderful about this book, where it was the whole book happened just one day in the life of Baka. So I guess there's a lot of that's very nice to see that these elements were similar in another book too. I'll definitely check it out. Thank you so much for bringing it to the notice. With that, I've not realized that I have gone on chatting for 1 hour, as always. So, if there is anything else, then please do let me know, or else we can try and wind up for today. This is the read for the next month, The Remains of the Day. I hope you all have got your copies. I'm really looking forward to dive into this. I have this beautiful Everyman edition, which I've been wanting to read forever. Thank you. And because of all of your motivation, I'm going to sit and read the book too. Uh, Thank you so much, Samal Ram. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Tulika. Thank you, Shanti. That's my mother. So I'm finding it a little funny to call her by name. So I'm going to call her as mom. So thank you, mom. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. As I said, the discussion is going to remain in the group. And if you can always come back to it, you can share it with others too. They can also join the group if they want to. But I think they'll need to join the group to view it, which they can. They are free to join the group. It was an interesting discussion. Thank you. I found it very interesting too. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm going to log off now. Bye bye. Meet you next month. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Tulika. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody. Bye.